In the vast landscapes of rural Nevada, where distances are measured in hours rather than miles, and neighbors can be strangers despite living on the same road for decades, human dignity can sometimes become a luxury that communities forget to protect. For some people, physical disability becomes a source of shame that families would rather hide than embrace. This is the story of Victoria Hayes, a brilliant woman whose life was forever changed by a riding accident that left her paralyzed from the waist down, and James Patterson, a solitary rancher whose compassion would prove stronger than society's cruelest prejudices. When a family's heartless decision brought them together under the most humiliating circumstances, neither could have predicted how profoundly they would transform each other's understanding of love, worth, and what it truly means to build a life together. Sometimes the most beautiful relationships bloom from the most terrible beginnings, and sometimes the people society discards become the very ones who teach us the deepest lessons about courage and grace. Before we dive into this powerful story of dignity restored and love discovered, let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. We love hearing from our viewers around the world. James Patterson had been running his cattle ranch in the high desert of Nevada for 15 years, ever since his father's sudden death from a heart attack had left him the sole inheritor of 3,000 acres of stubborn, unforgiving land that had been in the Patterson family for 3 generations. At 38, he had the deeply weathered hands and permanently squinting eyes of someone who had spent most of his adult life under the relentless, punishing desert sun. But he also possessed the quiet dignity and unshakable moral compass of a man who had learned to find deep satisfaction in honest, hard work and the simple pleasures that came from a life lived close to the land. The annual livestock auction in Reno was both business necessity and social obligation for ranchers throughout the entire region, bringing together men and women who spent most of their working lives in relative isolation on vast properties where human contact was often limited to brief encounters with neighboring ranchers, visiting veterinarians, and the occasional feed supplier making delivery as to remote locations. James typically made the long 4-hour drive across desert highways to buy premium breeding stock and sell surplus cattle from his own herd, conducting his business with professional efficiency and quiet competence before returning to the blessed solitude of his ranch, where he had long ago discovered that he genuinely preferred the honest, predictable company of animals to the often complicated, unpredictable, and sometimes disappointing nature of human relationships and social interactions. This year's auction had been proceeding with the usual rhythm and familiar patterns when James overheard a conversation taking place near the beer stand that made his blood run cold and his stomach clench with a mixture of disgust and disbelief at what he was hearing. "I'm telling you, someone's got to take her," Richard Hayes was saying to a small group of ranchers gathered near the beer stand. "We can't keep her anymore. She's become too much of a burden since the accident." James knew Richard Hayes by reputation throughout the ranching community, a man who owned and operated a mid-sized cattle operation about 50 miles east of Reno, but who was known far more widely for his excessive drinking, compulsive gambling, and general unreliability than for any particular skill in cattle management, business acumen, or personal character. The group gathered around him included several other local ranchers, most of whom appeared to be enjoying whatever crude entertainment Hayes was providing for their amusement, their faces showing the kind of callous interest that suggested they found genuine humor in another person's misfortune and degradation. "What exactly are you proposing, Richard?" asked Tom Bradley, a rancher James had done business with in the past. "I'm proposing that someone here takes my sister off my hands permanently," Hayes said, with the kind of casual cruelty that suggested he had long ago stopped seeing Victoria as a human being with feelings, dignity, and inherent worth. "Victoria's been living with us for 2 long years since her accident, and frankly, we're completely done with the entire situation. She's paralyzed from the waist down, Can't work like she used to, can't contribute anything meaningful to the household operations, and just sits around all day feeling sorry for herself and making everyone else miserable with her constant negative attitude and unrealistic expectations. James felt his jaw clench involuntarily and his hands form into tight fists as he listened to this casual, callous discussion of a human being as if she were nothing more than unwanted livestock that needed to be disposed of for the convenience and comfort of people who should have been protecting and supporting her during the most difficult period of her life. "So what? You're just going to give her away?" another rancher asked, laughing as if this was some kind of joke. "Why not? Hell, someone here could probably use a housekeeper who can't run away when the work gets tough or demanding," Hayes said with increasing crudeness, and the group erupted in the kind of cruel, heartless laughter that made James feel physically sick to his stomach. "She's smart enough, I'll give her that much. Used to be a teacher before the accident messed up all her grand plans for life. And she's still pretty easy on the eyes, even if half of her doesn't work properly anymore." James had heard more than enough of this degrading spectacle. He approached the group with the kind of steady, purposeful stride that made cattle instinctively move out of his way and had the same intimidating effect on most humans who possessed enough basic intelligence and survival instinct to recognize genuine authority and barely controlled anger when they encountered it. "Richard Hayes," he said, his voice carrying clearly despite its quiet tone. "That's me. You interested in making a deal?" James studied Hayes's face, noting the bloodshot eyes and alcohol on his breath despite the early hour. "I'm interested in understanding what kind of man talks about his sister like she's equipment he's trying to get rid of." The laughter around the group died away as Hayes's expression shifted from amusement to defensiveness. "Now look here, Patterson. You don't know what it's been like. Victoria's accident changed everything. She can't do anything for herself, needs help with basic things. The world owes her basic human dignity," James said evenly, "which seems to be something you're not capable of providing. If you think you can do better, you're welcome to try," Hayes shot back. "I'll make you the same offer I made everyone else here. Take Victoria off our hands, and I'll throw in her horse and all her belongings. Hell, I'll even pay you $1,000 to take her." The casual cruelty of the offer, treating a human being as a burden to be disposed of with financial incentive, struck James like a physical blow. But beneath his anger, he recognized an opportunity to extract someone from what was clearly an abusive situation. "You're serious about this?" James asked. "Dead serious. She's yours if you want her. We'll deliver her to your ranch next week." James looked around at the group of men who were watching this exchange as entertainment rather than a profound violation of human dignity. Several were still smirking, apparently finding amusement in the idea of trading a disabled woman like livestock. "All right, Hayes," James said finally. "You've got a deal. But understand this. Once she's at my ranch, this arrangement becomes permanent. You don't get to change your mind." Hayes extended his hand with a grin that suggested he thought he was getting the better end of this bargain. "Deal. We'll bring her out to your place on Saturday." As James shook the man's hand, he was already planning what was essentially a rescue operation disguised as a business transaction. He had no idea what condition Victoria Hayes would be in when she arrived, what kind of care she might need, or how she would react to being essentially sold to a stranger. The drive back to his ranch gave James 4 hours to think about what he'd just committed himself to. His house was set up for a single man who spent most of his time outdoors, functional, but not equipped for someone with mobility limitations. He would need to make modifications quickly. But something about the casual cruelty he'd witnessed had stirred a protective instinct that he hadn't felt in years. The idea of Victoria Hayes being treated like unwanted cargo had awakened an anger that surprised him with its intensity. James had 5 days to prepare for Victoria's arrival, 5 days to transform his bachelor quarters into something resembling a home suitable for 2 people. But more than the physical preparations, James found himself thinking about the woman who would soon be sharing his space. What kind of person was Victoria Hayes beneath the burden her family had made her feel she'd become? Victoria Hayes was about to discover that sometimes the most unexpected kindness comes from the most unlikely sources, and that dignity once lost could indeed be restored by someone willing to see past disability to the complete human being beneath. The arrival. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity and breathtaking beauty that made the Nevada desert look deceptively welcoming, the harsh, unforgiving landscape temporarily softened by perfect golden light and the promise of moderate temperatures before the sun climbed high enough in the cloudless sky to transform the entire region into a furnace that could kill the unprey. Impaired and unwary, James had been awake since well before dawn, his mind racing with anticipation and anxiety as he made final adjustments to the extensive modifications he'd spent every spare moment of the past week implementing throughout his house, working with the kind of focused, determined intensity that had helped him survive the most difficult and challenging periods of his life. The most significant and challenging change had been converting his completely unused den into a proper, fully accessible ground-floor bedroom, complete with a hospital bed he'd purchased from a medical supply company in Reno and a portable commode that could be positioned beside it for maximum convenience and dignity. He'd installed multiple grab bars in the main bathroom at various heights to accommodate different needs, built a smooth, sturdy ramp over the front steps using materials he'd driven to town specifically to purchase, and rearranged furniture throughout the house to create clear, unobstructed pathways that would accommodate a wheelchair without requiring the occupant to ask for help moving obstacle, or navigating tight spaces. At precisely 10 o'clock, just as Hayes had promised with his typical mixture of arrogance and reliability in matters that served his own interests, a dusty pickup truck pulling a horse trailer turned into James's long gravel driveway, kicking up the inevitable cloud of fine desert dust that hung in the still morning air like a tangible signal of impending and irreversible change. James recognized Richard Hayes behind the wheel, displaying his usual swagger and false confidence even while driving, and beside him sat a woman with long, dark hair who kept her face deliberately turned away from the approaching house, as if refusing to acknowledge her destination might somehow make this humiliating transaction less real or painful. James walked out to meet them, noting that Hayes climbed out with swagger while the woman remained seated, her posture suggesting resignation rather than relief. "Patterson," Hayes called out with false heartiness. "Here she is, as promised. Victoria, this is James Patterson, your new caretaker." The word hung in the air like an insult. When she finally turned to look at him, James felt his breath catch. Victoria Hayes was beautiful, strong features marked by experience, intelligence evident in her dark green eyes, and a dignity that her circumstances couldn't diminish. She was also clearly furious. "Mr. Patterson," she said, her voice carrying crisp diction and controlled anger, "I want you to understand that I had no say in this arrangement. My brother has apparently decided that I'm a commodity to be traded." James felt a surge of respect for her directness. "Ms. Hayes, I want you to understand that I see you as neither a commodity nor a charity case. I see you as a human being who deserves better treatment than you've been receiving." Hayes interrupted with a laugh. "Victoria's always been dramatic. The accident didn't change that." James turned to Hayes with an expression that made the other man step backward. "I think your business here is finished. You can unload her belongings and leave my property." While Hayes unloaded boxes with obvious haste, James approached Victoria. "Ms. Hayes, I know this situation is difficult. I want you to know that you're welcome in my home for as long as you choose to stay, without conditions beyond basic courtesy. If you decide you want other arrangements, I'll help you do that." Victoria studied his face intently. "Why?" she asked simply. "Because what I witnessed at the auction was wrong. Because you deserve to be treated with dignity. I'm not a pet project, Mr. Patterson. I don't need to be fixed or saved. I just need to be treated like a human being. That's exactly what I'm offering. Nothing more, nothing less. After Hayes departed with obvious relief, James found himself alone with Victoria and an impressive pile of belongings that suggested a life interrupted rather than concluded. There were books, art supplies, riding equipment, and medical supplies. "Your horse is beautiful," James said, noting the magnificent chestnut mare. "Luna," Victoria said, warmth entering her voice for the first time. "She was my barrel racing partner before the accident. Now she's just another thing I can't properly take care of." "What makes you think you can't take care of her?" "I can't ride anymore. I can't groom her properly, can't muck her stall." "Can you still love her? Can you still provide her with companionship and the benefit of your knowledge about her needs?" Victoria looked at him sharply. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that there might be more ways to care for a horse than the traditional ones." James helped Victoria transfer to her wheelchair, noting her practiced efficiency and the strength in her arms and shoulders. The tour of the house was awkward but necessary. Victoria examined each modification with critical eyes. "You did all this in a week?" she asked, running her hand along the smooth ramp. "Basic carpentry isn't complicated when you have motivation." "And what motivated you to do this for a stranger?" James paused, choosing his words carefully. "I've lived alone for a long time, but listening to your brother talk about you like you were a problem to be solved instead of a person to be loved, it reminded me that solitude and loneliness aren't the same thing." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "James, I need you to understand something. I'm not going to be grateful and inspiring. Some days I'm going to be angry and bitter. Some days I'm going to grieve for everything I've lost." "Good," James said, surprising her, "because I'm not looking for an inspirational story. I'm looking for honest human company, which includes all the difficult emotions." That evening, as they shared their first dinner together, Victoria began to relax in small increments. The food was simple but well prepared, the conversation careful but genuine. "Can I ask what happened?" James said. "Your accident, I mean." Victoria stared out the window at the darkening desert. "I was training Luna for a competition. We were working on barrel racing patterns. I was pushing too hard, taking risks. Luna stumbled and I went flying, landed wrong, compressed my spine. I'm sorry. The worst part wasn't the physical injury. It was watching everyone decide that I was no longer the same person. They all started treating me like I was fragile or tragic instead of just me. People have trouble seeing past disability to the person underneath." "Exactly. And eventually I started believing them, started thinking that maybe I really was just a burden. And now?" Victoria looked around the kitchen. "Now I'm not sure what I believe. But for the first time in 2 years, someone has treated me like I might have something to offer." As they settled into shared space that first evening, James realized that bringing Victoria to his ranch had rescued him from a loneliness he hadn't fully acknowledged until now. The house felt different with another person in it, more alive somehow. They were still strangers in many ways, but they were no longer alone. Finding common ground. 3 months after Victoria's arrival at the ranch, the partnership that had begun as essentially a rescue operation had evolved into something neither of them had expected or dared to hope for. A genuine collaboration that was transforming both their lives in ways that extended far beyond mere companionship or the practical sharing of living space. The awkwardness and uncertainty that had characterized those first difficult weeks had gradually given way to a comfortable, natural routine that surprised both of them with its ease and mutual benefit. She had systematized his record-keeping, developed breeding charts, and created feeding schedules that improved his cattle's health measurably. On this particular morning in January, James found Victoria in the kitchen before dawn, working at her laptop with focused intensity. "You're up early," he observed, starting the coffee. "I couldn't sleep. I've been researching something, and I think I might have found a solution to a problem I didn't know we had." Victoria turned her laptop so James could see a website for therapeutic riding programs. "I've been thinking about Luna, about how she's been mostly idle since I can't ride her anymore. But what if there was a way for her to contribute to something meaningful? James studied the information, noting descriptions of how horses could help children and adults with various challenges. "You're thinking about starting a therapeutic riding program here." "I'm thinking about the possibility. I have the educational background to understand learning disabilities. You have the land and horse management expertise. Luna has the temperament to work with people who need patience." For the next hour, Victoria outlined a vision that was both ambitious and practical. She had researched licensing requirements, insurance considerations, and funding possibilities. "The beautiful thing about this," Victoria said, "is that it would give Luna purpose again. It would use my teaching skills in a new way, and it would create something valuable for families who need it. And it would prove that a paralyzed woman and a lonely rancher can build something together that's bigger than either could create alone," James added. The conversation was interrupted by a vehicle in the driveway. James looked out to see a familiar pickup truck, and his expression darkened. "Your brother," James said simply. Richard Hayes climbed out with the same swagger, but this time his expression carried curiosity rather than eagerness to be rid of a burden. "Richard," Victoria said when James opened the door, her voice carefully neutral, "what brings you out here? Can't a man check on his sister? Wanted to see how you were settling in." "I'm doing very well," Victoria said with pride. "James and I are actually planning to start a therapeutic riding program. We're going to help children with disabilities learn to ride." Hayes's expression shifted to skepticism, mixed with resentment. "Sounds expensive. You sure you're not taking on more than you can handle?" "We're sure," James said firmly. "Sounds like it might be profitable too. Therapeutic programs, people pay good money for that." Victoria's expression grew cold. "Richard, if you're here because you think you can profit from what we're building, you can leave now. We're family. If you're doing well, seems like you might want to share some of that good fortune. The people who took care of me when I needed it are sitting right here," she said, gesturing toward James. "You are the person who literally sold me to a stranger because you found me inconvenient. You have no claim on my success." Hayes tried to argue, but Victoria's responses were clear and final. She had found her place, her purpose, and her family. After Hayes left, Victoria and James sat processing what had happened. "I'm sorry you had to witness that," Victoria said. "I'm proud of how you handled it. You stood up for yourself, for us, for what we're building together." "James, can I tell you something?" "Always. 3 months ago, I thought my life was over. Living here with you, planning this program, feeling useful again, it's given me back something I thought I'd lost forever." "What's that?" "Hope. Hope that the best parts of my life might still be ahead of me." James reached across the table and took her hand. "Victoria, can I tell you something?" She nodded. "I think I'm falling in love with you. Not because I saved you, but because you've shown me what it means to be truly alive again. You've brought purpose and joy into my life in ways I never thought possible." Victoria's eyes filled with happy tears. "James, I've been hoping you felt the same way, because I love you too, not for rescuing me, but for seeing me as a complete person worthy of love and partnership." As they sat, holding hands across the table, where they'd shared so many meals and conversations, James and Victoria realized that what had begun as a business transaction born of cruelty had become something beautiful and lasting. They were no longer just two people sharing space out of necessity. They were partners in every sense, building a life together that honored both their individual strengths and their shared commitment to creating something meaningful. A life built on love. 1 year after Victoria's arrival, the transformation was visible from the moment visitors turned into the driveway. What had once been a functional cattle operation had become something extraordinary. A working ranch that also served as a beacon of hope for families throughout northern Nevada. The therapeutic riding program was now a reality, with 12 regular clients ranging in age from 6 to 65, each working with carefully selected horses to build physical strength, emotional confidence, and life skills. Luna had become the star of the program, her gentle nature making her perfect for children who needed patience and consistency. On this particular morning in October, exactly 1 year after Richard Hayes had delivered Victoria to the ranch like unwanted cargo, James was making final preparations for their first annual benefit dinner for the therapeutic riding program. Tomorrow, he planned to ask Victoria to marry him. "The caterers will be here at 3, Victoria said, reviewing her checklist with efficiency. "The photographer arrives at 4, and guests should start arriving around 5:30. James watched her work, marveling at how completely she had transformed not just their operation, but his understanding of partnership. Victoria brought organizational skills that elevated everything they did together, while her teaching background made her naturally gifted at communicating with clients and families. "Nervous?" he asked. "Excited," Victoria corrected. "A year ago, I thought my life was over. Tonight, we're celebrating a program that's changing lives and proving that people with disabilities can create something meaningful." As the evening progressed and guests arrived, James found himself watching Victoria in her element. She moved through the crowd with grace and confidence, sharing stories about the program's successes, discussing expansion possibilities with potential donors. "Mrs. Patterson," said Dr. Sarah Chen, a pediatric therapist from Reno, "your program has made such a difference for the children I work with." James felt pride at hearing Victoria addressed as Mrs. Patterson, even though they weren't married yet. The assumption felt natural, like a preview of the future he hoped to build with her. As the evening wound down and the last guests departed, James and Victoria found themselves alone in the arena, where so much healing had taken place. The barn was quiet except for gentle sounds of horses settling in for the night. "Thank you," Victoria said, leaning back against James as they watched Luna graze in the moonlit pasture. "For what?" "For seeing me as something more than a burden. For believing that I could contribute, for loving me completely, including the parts that don't work anymore." James turned Victoria's wheelchair so they were facing each other, then knelt down so they were at eye level. From his pocket, he pulled out a ring that had belonged to his grandmother, a simple gold band with a small diamond. "Victoria," he said, "a year ago, your brother brought you here as if you were a problem to be solved, but you weren't a problem. You were the answer to a question I didn't even know I was asking." Victoria's eyes filled with tears as she realized what was happening. The question was, how does a man build a life that matters? The answer was, he finds someone to share that life with. Someone who challenges him to be better, who brings gifts he doesn't possess, who sees possibilities he can't imagine. James took Victoria's hand. "Victoria Hayes, will you marry me? Will you be my partner in all of this? The ranch, the program, the life we're building together?" Victoria's answer came through tears and laughter and pure joy. "Yes, James. Yes to all of it. Yes to marriage. Yes to partnership. Yes to building something beautiful together." As James slipped the ring onto Victoria's finger, both were thinking about the journey that had brought them to this moment. A year ago, Victoria had been discarded by her family as damaged goods. Tonight, she was engaged to a man who saw her as the most precious thing in his world. "You know what the best part is?" Victoria said as they headed back to their home. "What?" "A year ago, Richard thought he was getting rid of a burden. Instead, he gave you the woman who would become your wife and helped you discover a purpose bigger than either of us imagined." James laughed, recognizing the irony. "Should we send him a thank you card?" "Absolutely not," Victoria said firmly. "But we should start planning our wedding, because I want to marry you before winter sets in." "Why the rush?" Victoria smiled. "Because I've already wasted too much time believing that my life was over. I want to start our married life as soon as possible, because I know now that the best is yet to come." As they settled into their home that night, engaged and surrounded by evidence of what they had built together, James and Victoria reflected on how completely their understanding of love and partnership had been transformed. They had proven that disability didn't diminish worth, that cruelty could be overcome by kindness, and that the most profound connections often emerged from the most challenging circumstances. Their love story had begun with casual cruelty, but it had become something beautiful, lasting, and deeply meaningful. 6 months later, James and Victoria were married in the same arena, where their therapeutic riding program had helped dozens of children discover their own strength and courage. Luna served as an honorary member of the wedding party, decorated with flowers and standing patiently while the ceremony took place around her. They had built something beautiful together, not just a successful program or thriving ranch, but a life that proved love could triumph over the cruelest circumstances and that partnership could transform individual limitations into shared strengths. The woman who had been given away as a joke had become the heart of everything meaningful in James's world. The lonely rancher who had rescued her out of principle had discovered that sometimes saving someone else becomes the very thing that saves you too. Their story had become legend in their community, not as inspiration about overcoming disability, but as proof that human dignity was non-negotiable and that real love saw past physical limitations to embrace the complete person beneath. As they danced their first dance as husband and wife, Victoria in her wheelchair, James kneeling beside her, moving together to music that celebrated what they had built, everyone present understood they were witnessing something rare and precious. This was what love looked like when based on seeing and being seen completely. This was what partnership meant when it honored both individual strength and shared vulnerability. This was what happened when two people decided that together they could create something far more beautiful than either could imagine alone. The cruel joke had become the foundation of the most genuine love story their community had ever witnessed. This incredible story of Victoria and James reminds us that true love sees beyond physical limitations to embrace the whole person, and that the most meaningful relationships often grow from the most challenging beginnings. If this story moved you, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more inspiring stories about love and second chances. Let us know in the comments what city you're watching from and share how someone's compassion has changed your life. Remember, we all have the power to see past surface appearances, to recognize the extraordinary potential in everyone we meet. Until next time, keep believing in the transformative power of love.